Well, tatalak mima kala tiwama. Ina Monique was Tum Yapsayo, Soyapatemki, Joel Moffett. Welcome everyone to our Capitol Hill Ocean Week virtual side event, Ocean and Climate and Culture, Indigenous Leadership and Ocean Conservation. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to the esteemed panel that you'll get to meet in a few moments. Thank you to the National Ocean Protection Coalition for hosting. And thank you to all the other organizers who helped make this possible. My name is Joel Moffett. I am a citizen of the Nez Perce tribe. I am the director of environmental projects at Native Americans in Philanthropy. My people come from present-day Idaho, Washington, and Oregon, and Montana, so the Pacific Northwest. I currently live on Suquamish land in the Seattle area, and I am zooming in from beautiful Shakopee land in Minnesota at the National Congress of American Indians Convention. And I just thank everyone for their dedication to just diving into this important subject, looking at really elevating Indigenous voices, tribal nations, and the focus that we have on protecting and conserving our lands, waters, and species, which really goes back to protecting and restoring our way of life, our connections with those resources that have sustained us for thousands of years. It's integral. It's a key moment in history right now where we're battling climate crisis and biodiversity crisis and trying to transition off of fossil fuels to renewables, trying to be better relatives and to our plant and animals, brothers and sisters in the land and water, and go back to a more balanced approach to stewarding our planet. And that really goes back to focusing on how tribal nations and indigenous peoples have done it for millennia. And the wisdom and the knowledge that we've gained from living and working in our individual communities and our places for thousands of years. And it really is incumbent upon the federal government and all of our partners in the non-governmental organization world and philanthropy to really elevate and support tribal nations, indigenous peoples. And so we can help educate and lead in these conservation efforts so that we can accomplish all the goals of 30 by 30 and a lot of these initiatives to really push back against the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, and save our waters, our lands, and our species. So thank you for joining us today. We have an esteemed panel to dive into those subjects and talk about protecting specifically our oceans and our waters. I live on Suquamish land, as I said, so I live on the coast, protected Puget Sound, and I like to always talk about I've been there 8 years, so I've been adopted into a canoe family there, and they always say when the tide's out, the table is set, and I always like to keep that in mind when highlighting the connection between the ocean and the people and providing all we need. And so I'd like to start by introducing our panel. And first we have Solomon Kahoʻohalahala. Solomon, Uncle Sol, as he's affectionately known, is a 7th generation Native Hawaiian descendant from the small island of Lānaʻi. He currently serves as the Native Hawaiian Elder on the Reserve Advisory Council and is the chair of the Hawaiian Islands Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary. Following Uncle Sol, we have Dr. Kelsey Leonard. She's an assistant professor at the University of Waterloo. Dr. Kelsey Leonard holds a Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Waters, Climate and Sustainability, and is an assistant professor in the School of Environment, Resources, and Sustainability in the Faculty of Environment at the University of Waterloo. And last but certainly not least, we have Marissa Merculieff. She's director of the Office of Justice and Governance Administration at Aleut Community of St. Paul Island Tribal Government. That's a federally recognized tribe located on St. Paul Island in the Bering Sea off the coast of Alaska. Marissa is a tribal member, raised on St. Paul in a halibut fishing family, and left to earn her JD from Arizona State University. And I failed to mention Dr. Kelsey Leonard is an enrolled citizen of the Shinnecock Indian Nation, and she represents the nation on the Mid-Atlantic Committee on the Ocean, which is charged with protecting America's ocean ecosystems and coastlines. Wonderful, wonderful group of speakers here today. And I know we only have a short amount of time, so I want to dive right in to the questions and hear their stories directly from these Indigenous leaders and their communities. So the first question I'd like to ask, and we'll address all, this will be for all three, but first we'll go with Uncle Saul. From Hawaii to New York to Alaska, each of your communities has a relationship with and stewardship of land and water. In a rapidly changing climate, what changes are you seeing near, on, and in the water? How do your communities approach stewarding the coast and ocean? What challenges are you facing, especially the challenges that are related to climate change?
Uncle Saul, you're on mute.
Okay, thank you. Aloha. I think a lot of things in those questions, but I basically wanted to give a cultural perspective of our relationship to the environment and our resources and the knowledge that the people carry that help us to decide how best to deal with climate change crisis, and also to consider how we might, in our view, we have a term that's called ʻāina momona, is to fatten the land, so to speak. And that for us was a sustained system that was ensuring that we could provide for all of our people. So very simply, I want to just start by telling you about a chant that we have, a story, and it's in part our genealogy, and it's called the Kumulipo. And in the Kumulipo, it begins by telling us that we are created from the deepest dark and the light, and the union of dark and light create what we call the Vali Vali, which is the matter in which the first creatures are coming from, emerging from. And it says in our chant, the Kumulipo, that hanau ikapo, hanau Kumulipo ikapo he kane, hanau po ele ikapo he wahine, hanau ka uku ko akoa he ko apuka. So it says that the first creatures to emerge from this vali vali, this matter, will be the coral polyp. And from that point, all other things are created into the vertical columns of the deep sea, to the near surface waters, into the near shores, onto the land, up into the hills, into the mountains, and even taking flight into the skies. We, as a people, we do not come, we're not ushered into this place until much, much later. But what we do recognize, that when we come into this place that we call Honua, this island earth of which we live, everything is in balance. And so our responsibility is that we have the inherent responsibility to care for everything that precedes us. So we call them our Kupuna. They're our elders. And it goes all the way to the first creature, which is the coral polyp. So if we have this responsibility, then it's clear to us that the terrestrial areas are not separated from the marine. They're all integrated. And with that, we have to keep in mind that the balance of this is what is necessary for the people to be sustained, you know. And so one of the practices that I talk about is how to sustain that system was one of ʻāina momona, to make the land fat. And by that we mean is prepare and understand the relationship of resources to their environment so that they could actually survive and sustain within that ecosystem. And by doing that, they're fattened and they're made plentiful. And by that plentiful, the land is fattened, the sea is fattened, and then the people are the beneficiaries of this. So we're in troubled times when we're really at the point where we've changed ecosystems to become imbalanced. And what we're calling upon from an Indigenous perspective is perhaps another part of our culture is that to move forward, we need to look backward. So we have a saying, ikawa mamua, ikawa mahope. If you want to move forward, then you have to go backward. But it means that we need to go back to look at what helped to sustain these systems and then bring them back into place. Because if we can do that, then what we're challenged with in these times in changes to the environment, to the ecosystems, are crying for balance. They're crying to be put back. And Indigenous people understand that. So we need to be able to bring that back into balance. And that becomes now our responsibility to our ancestors for this one place that we call home, which is island Earth. So that is our perspective of how we must participate and continue to provide for these kinds of opportunities to bring our places back into balance and to ʻāina momona, fatten the land.
That's yeah. Thank you, Uncle Saul. And it reminds me of a saying that I hear regularly when I'm out talking to tribal leaders and visiting the lands, and where they talk about this work of putting it back in balance, and they talk about healing the land and the waters. And they said, well, when you heal the land and the waters, you're also healing yourself and your people. And so I think that's a beautiful thing that I think really brings it all home. But I love fattening too. I love that as well. Make them fat and make them healthy. Next, I'd like to ask the same question to Dr. Leonard. In a rapidly changing climate, what changes are you seeing near, on, and in the water? How do your communities approach stewarding the coast and ocean? What challenges are you facing, especially the challenges that are related to climate change?
Thank you so much for that question, and to Uncle Saul for starting us off in a good way. And Akueo Nikasa, hello, good day, everyone. As Joel mentioned, I'm from the Shinnecock Nation. It's where I'm zooming in and joining you today from. So many thoughts to answer that question, especially with what many of you are experiencing today being on the East Coast. But in trying to conceptualize what I would share with you today, I actually thought that I would share some thoughts that I had written just a little while ago. And what it captures is exactly what you were asking, Joel, to the question of what are we noticing, what are we experiencing, and what does this mean for our communities? So we lost a relative this past weekend. They found him dead on the beach. He had been brutally beaten, struck. He was full-bodied. He was 28 feet long. A humpback whale. 17. He was the 17th humpback whale to die this year in our waters. It's only June. The strawberry moon has not yet eclipsed the star. struck. Full-bodied, found dead on the beach. We weren't allowed to claim the body. Morning, struck. Morning struck. Bodies turned skeletons, beaches turned graveyards, struck. By how our world continues to kill the sacred, struck. By boats, struck. By greed, struck. By you. Our last breath, struck. When I wrote these words a few weeks ago, that humpback whale was the 17th to die. There have now been more that have died, decomposing carcasses, washing up on our shores on the Atlantic coast. And so I think when we talk about climate change, when we talk about what we're doing in the ocean as human beings and the way in which it's impacting other relatives, it's important to heed their messages. It's important to understand that they are not sacrificial lives, that their lives matter, that each loss of life is, as some would say, a miner's canary to what is largely happening across our planet. You know, I'm sitting here from the coast of Long Island, where we are covered in smoke. We can't really go outside without smelling it so palpable and thick that you immediately have to come indoors. I was reading online that they said 24 hours worth of exposure to this air quality is like chain smoking 6 cigarettes. So I also then heard from elders today who said, you know, we were experiencing this, we're seeing this, but we also can be thankful because our other relatives, First Nations on the other side of the continent of Turtle Island, they're losing their homes. They're being evacuated due to these fires. And so we're here enduring that smoke. And I think what it says to us is that we're all connected and that the choices that we make impact us no matter where we are in the world. And I think the other side of that coin is that this is what we as Indigenous peoples have been saying for decades, if not centuries. And at what point will the rest of the world wake up and realize that your orange sky today could be the orange sky of the rest of your existence on this planet?
Thank you, Doctor. Powerful words, and just like, yeah, heartfelt condolences. That's oh my God, I was unaware that it was there were that many whales that had passed away and come up on the shore, and it just you know really emphasizes the point that we are in a crisis moment right now. And like you said, hopefully the world is waking up, because it's a message that the Indigenous peoples have been saying for quite some time. But thank you for that. Next, I'd like to ask the same question to Marissa. In a rapidly changing climate, what changes are you seeing near, on, and in the water up in Alaska or in New Zealand? You're in Aotearoa right now. How do your communities approach stewarding the coast and ocean? What challenges are you facing, and especially the challenges that are related to climate change?
Yeah, thanks, Joel. Yeah, I'm calling in from New Zealand, so I'm able to see climate change from the top of the world to the bottom of the world. And we have very similar issues, obviously, no matter where we are. But out in the Bering Sea, what we're really seeing right now is a crash of all the fishing around us, right? And St. Paul is in the middle of billion-dollar fishing industries. We've lost the crab. Other fisheries are starting to collapse. Fishery management is saying otherwise, but we can see it, right? And Uncle Saul laid it out, our connection with our ecosystem and the knowledge that we have as Indigenous people. And I think one of the struggles, the biggest struggle we have, is getting that knowledge incorporated in a formal way with our federal government and through fishery management councils and all of that. And that's a struggle we're all dealing with, especially in our Alaska coastal communities. But we, just to kind of give an update, because I did speak at CHOW last year, and we had a sanctuary nomination that just went into inventory. It is a proposed co-managed sanctuary with our tribe. It's still in inventory, and we are struggling to get it moving in any direction because of the fishing industry, right? They do have the money for very high-powered lobbyists, and they're doing their job efficiently, which is to not make any changes to anything in the Bering Sea. And of course, they'll fish the last fish and move on, and our people will be left out there struggling to figure out how to survive. And I'm sure we will, because we've been doing it for thousands of years. But it's not easy. And I'm just as frustrated as I was last year with the federal government, not listening to us and not really taking our voices into consideration when they're thinking about management plans and how to deal with all these crises we're having across the planet. And I think, Uncle Saul really just laid it out beautifully, right? How we're all connected and how our people know this. And it's almost common sense to us. It is common sense of how we should be managing our ecosystems. And we are in the middle of the crisis. So I'm not sure how much more I can add to that. But yeah, that's kind of where our status is. We haven't made any progress in a year, even with this administration who's made all these promises to Indigenous people, to climate change, to the ecosystems, to the environment. We haven't seen it. We haven't seen it put into action. And so that's kind of why I joined again this year on this panel, is to let everyone know we're not seeing it. And I think that's kind of where we're all doing a call to action. Like something's got to change. And it's not happening.
Thank you for raising that important point, Marissa. And yeah, I mentioned I'm Nez Perce, which is inland, the Columbia Plateau, but we eat salmon. We're salmon people, and that connects the Northwest and Alaska, and so our fish are born inland to the headwaters, and then they go make their way all the way out to the ocean, and then we've found evidence of them all the way up past Alaska up into the Kamchatka Peninsula, way over in Russia. And so we're all, even though we're so far away, we're all connected, especially with the ocean and the freshwater and the fisheries. And so I feel for you. I see, talking with my Alaska relatives and friends about the impacts to that life force, that the fish and the fish runs, and to see that it's changing so rapidly, right? And it's such a short amount of time. So when you talk about this effort to designate a sanctuary, and how you're running into roadblocks and not getting support from federal trustee, and do you see a pathway? How can the folks that are here listening, how can we help your not only your tribe, but all the tribes that could benefit from sanctuary designations? How can we get you on that path, and not just to designate and protect and conserve that area, but then have the tribes at the table in co-management of this once the sanctuary is established, and helping to incorporate the traditional knowledge that Uncle Saul and Dr. have talked about, and you have talked about?
Well, I think I've been telling Uncle Saul, let's just expand the humpback whale sanctuary all the way up to Alaska because of what you said, right? They travel up there. Quickest, fastest, easiest path for us. Just expand that. But realistically, I think just practically, obviously, is funding, number one, right? To our Indigenous communities. We are carrying all of the work, our tribe is to get the sanctuary moving, and even to designate it and put all the science into it, all of that. But the tribe is paying for all of that, even though at the end of the day, it would be a federal government sanctuary, right? It's a NOAA sanctuary. That's something we're not okay with, which is why we proposed it from the get-go as co-management, and we didn't want it to move forward until the NOAA knew how we wanted to approach co-management. So we're having those discussions. But yeah, just a very practical funding side of things. There isn't that funding to help our tribal communities keep on this momentum, and especially when you're starting to go up against lobbyists on the other side, right? We don't have the same ability, that capacity. So that's a very easy starting point, is funding, whether it's the private, the nonprofit, but mostly the federal government should be sharing in that, because it is going to be their sanctuary. So I think that is the first place to start, is funding.
Thanks, Marissa. And I don't know, Uncle Saul or Doctor, if you have any comments on that particular question with regards to these efforts to establish sanctuaries and provide more protection. How have you, in your experience, is there a way, a pathway that we have not taken yet to achieve that? And how can we achieve more stewardship by the indigenous peoples from those communities, from those areas, because we have that knowledge and built up over thousands of years? How can we incorporate that into these designations?
I can jump in, and then Uncle Saul, if you want to round us out, because you've got a wealth of experience in this space. I would just echo, what Marissa said in terms of funding. Like, the sanctuary process right now is wholly underfunded. It's sort of like it's like this shiny diamond in a glass case, and everybody wants it, but nobody wants to actually pay for it. And that's really what it feels like in terms of, what's happening on the ground. I think we are seeing new movement. There was some recent announcement in recent days that there is sort of additional funding being committed to sanctuaries. But from an Indigenous leader perspective side of that, I think when we hear those announcements, it's like, okay, that sounds awesome, but how is it actually going to get to us in terms of funds? Is it going to be something that requires a competitive grant process, which is more hoops and, jumps for us to go through to try and be able to access the funds to actually implement the processes towards not only, designation, but nomination, et cetera, et cetera. And so what we really need to see is that, with those funds that are being allocated, and there still needs to be more, that there actually are direct grants that are provided to the sanctuaries that are already in the system to be, that have already been nominated and are going through the designation process. And then there needs to be sort of, based after those, there need to be future direct grant aspects in which you can apply for future sanctuary processes, or for future sanctuaries that want to be put forward around the US. So that's high level. I think, building off of what Marissa said, is that if you want there to be 30 by 30, if you want there to be a conservation of marine areas, you actually have to fund that. And I think a little bit of the back and forth, or the non-commitment, or the commitment and then sort of backtracking, leaves there to be a lot of mistrust in the process. I think, as you were, maybe hearing in Marissa's words, or that I can say from what we've, seen a little bit in trying to go through the canyons process here on the Atlantic, the US federal government loves to give money to the blue economy side of ocean-based climate solutions. But to the actual conservation side, not so much, particularly when that's Indigenous led. And so I want to see less words and more actions backed up with direct dollars.
Well said, Dr. Leonard. Uncle Saul, did you have some insights?
Well, I think I definitely agree with both of us, our speakers, concerning the funding and how to access them, and to be sure. But I think for many of our Indigenous communities, and I can speak for us directly coming from Hawaii, is that it has always been issues and challenges that we've faced in trying to support these kinds of efforts for conservation. But bottom line is, it is the Indigenous community that are there on the ground. They're the ones that are doing the work. And oftentimes those kinds of work doesn't require us to be funded. It's an inherent responsibility to make sure that our resources are cared for. And this idea that I provided for you, this ʻāina momona, it is not a federal agency that's going to be the key for you to make and enrich your resources so that you can say that your land and your sea is fattened. It is really going to be the indigenous communities that are going to do this. And then, yes, funding does come as a necessary part to help implement that beyond, but lacking funding, indigenous communities are not prevented from continuing to do the work that they do. Otherwise, we would not even be here at this place, at this juncture, to be able to talk about what still remains in our ecosystems and our resources. And it is the work of our indigenous people that have been able to sustain and keep these processes going. I wanted to also add is that we're dealing with systems that have been put in place that have never been incorporating indigenous knowledge and experience and thought. And so we find ourselves having to weave through all of this. And so these systems have created barriers, they've created boundaries, they've created lines. And from an indigenous perspective, these barriers do not exist. Our ocean isn't only to be protected within the authority of governments that have created these barriers, that we don't see that relationship, that it's a fluid one. The kohola, the whale that you talk about, for us, shares spaces as well with Marissa there in the northern seas. They're our same animals, but we don't tell the animals that, you know, I'm only going to protect you in the space that I have here. I have to think about the connection that moves beyond those barriers. So for us, it's getting these systems to understand that it goes far beyond just talking about filling the requirements for current processes, current boundaries, and current jurisdictions, because it's not within our cultural fabric. And that's why I share with you our chant that says that we are all connected from the seas to the land, to the sky, to the heavens, and then the recycling back. And it goes back into that same cycle of creation again, and it continues to move. But if we don't continue to support that, and we don't continue to advocate for that, that the systems are going to continue to guide us in the manner that they're comfortable with. And we need to break through that. And part of it is to just continue to establish what you have, so that when it comes time to talk about how do we co-manage these, you already have established your practices. You already have established your relationship to place. You have already established your care of resources. And then that co-management becomes a difficult thing for government systems to deny. And if they are truly saying that they want to bring equity, they want to bring justice into the acknowledgement of indigenous practices and processes, then they need to accept then what it is you're bringing to the table, because you're continuing to practice them. And so I don't want to discount the fact that funding is necessary, but there is still a part of it that is still going to have to happen with or without funding. You know, so.
Thank you, Uncle Saul. And yeah, that's an important point to make. You know, we talk about how much indigenous communities, tribal nations have done to protect their ecosystems, the communities, the lands, waters that they've been living on, and sustain them for thousands of years. We've been doing that with little to no resources, and we're still going to do it, right? Because we're always going to be here. And to go to, you know, Marissa's point and others about, you know, maybe fishing industry or other businesses that come in and exploit the resources in our lands and waters, well, they're going to leave at some point. But we're always going to be here, continuing that generational, multi-generational effort to take care and steward our relatives and lands and waters. So, but we can do so much more if we had the resources, if we had a significant increase of federal resources, of philanthropic resources. And that's where my organization comes in, is we're really trying to connect those philanthropic organizations to tribes like yourself, to Indigenous communities, and inform them about the great work you're doing, but also the needs. And I heard a lot about some of the challenges, some of the roadblocks, if it's funding, if it's these systems that were created not to incorporate Indigenous leadership and knowledge that we have to transform. The whole process of establishing and designating sanctuaries. I've heard a lot of that. I've heard from you, and I hope the people on this call have heard you. But you've also talked about where there's bright spots, how there's some hope if we are to change those systems and incorporate Indigenous leadership and knowledge in these, and give us back the authority that we have over our lands and waters and species. What shifts, and I guess I'll go in reverse order and go to Marissa first. What shifts do you hope to see in the next, year and a half, 2 years? I know we have a small window of this administration. What do you hope to see by the end of 2024? What wins do you want to be celebrating at the end of 2024?
Well, I think going off of what Uncle Saul just said about the barriers, I would like to see, just as far as focusing on traditional knowledge and everything that we have in our Indigenous communities, I would like to see that incorporated faster into federal government management. And by the end of 2024, it should just be a common occurrence, right? And as part of that, we on St. Paul, we're building, like Uncle Saul said, we're doing this without funding, of course. We're just going to figure out how to do it, but we're building the research center that is going to be run by our tribe in middle of the Bering Seas, and in a way to try to get that moving faster, get our knowledge incorporated into the systems in a way that they can understand it. And I think that's part of the struggle, right? Is, yeah, the federal government wants to incorporate traditional knowledge, but how do you do that when a lot of it is spoken knowledge, right? It's not written in a way that they can understand. So we've created an app that collects traditional knowledge and puts out data. So we're trying to do something that the federal government recognizes in the Western way, but streamlines it so that we can work into the management system much quicker. And so I would like to see by 2024 that it is just common practice. Like, our traditional knowledge is just a part of every single management decision, that it's not even given a second thought to incorporate that. And I think that can be done really quickly. And this administration is on the right path with that, but it needs to be done faster. Like, for us, our fisheries are collapsing, right? And they're collapsing in real time. So it's got to be done more quickly. I think that's what I'd like to see.
Thanks, Marissa. Same question to Dr. Leonard. What shifts do you hope to see by the end of 2024? What wins do you want to be celebrating?
Thank you so much for that. Well, I think, it's been actually really great. I think in terms of the ONMS Office of National Marine Sanctuaries within NOAA, I think they have a really great team that is open to not only pushing forward the potential of co-management, but also what I would say by 2024 is the U.S. is even talking about co-management is behind. They need to be talking about Indigenous-led managed areas and Indigenous-led conservation, which is where the rest of the world already is in 2023. So I'm hoping that by 2024 they can catch up and really prioritize that. And so I think that the ONMS, the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, is really supportive of that. They're facing difficulties from other aspects of the administration and the agencies. And so for those that are on the line today, I think to what Uncle Saul said and others have said, as Indigenous nations and peoples, we are actively and have for millennia actively been protecting our environments and the places that we're connected to and the waters that we belong to. What we are still having a persistent challenge around is the obstacles that are put forward by the federal government and or the state that work to restrict us from doing things that we have always done. So for those on the line today, who you vote for in state, local, and federal elections have dire consequences in terms of how the ocean is protected from now on. So whoever you vote for in the next 6 to 12 months and in 2024 is directly going to impact how the ocean is protected. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And so you really have to be conscientious as a voter and as a citizen of this country, and to ask yourself of your candidates, how are they going to protect the ocean? And how are they working with tribes and indigenous peoples around the US to support their indigenous-led management and protection efforts of these areas? So those would be sort of two big things that I would hope for in 2024. And I would just say, lastly, I think we also need to be thinking of, as Uncle Saul said and Marissa said, in their remarks today, that the ocean itself is a living being, and there are ways in which we can protect the ocean's rights itself. And so I have great colleagues at the Earth Law Center, and there are other organizations like Movement Rights that work particularly with tribes and First Nations, Indigenous Environmental Network, who are actively working right now to make sure that we recognize the inherent rights of the ocean. And Earth Law Center itself is pushing for a universal declaration on ocean rights. And I think that there needs to be synergy between those efforts at the international level for the protection of the ocean and what we do at the US level in terms of national marine sanctuaries.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Leonard. Go ahead, Uncle Saul. What would you want to see at the end of 24? What wins do you want to be celebrating?
Well, I think I agree that we need to break those barriers that we all understand is happening. But if we could change the mindset of government, and we could change the mindset of our people to understand that there is, like you just said, a cultural connection to all ecosystems that are living. And when we begin to break those barriers down and come to understand that we're really here on the only island Earth that is our home, we only have the one, and that we cannot be separated in any part of that, because anything we do to one section of it has an impact to the whole. And building that kind of relationship amongst the people is important, so that we can know that moving forward that we're a collective. We've been fortunate to have an opportunity by demonstrating our relationship to our place through Papahano Mokuakea as an example, and we've been able to establish our cultural relationship to place. We've been able to bring the practices of the culture and how to bring it into balance, how to care for it, how to gather. And we've been able to use that as a strong position for the continuance in terms of management moving forward. And without that, we would not have been able to have established this co-management kind of relationship. And I would hope that in 2024, that it is an automatic part of the system to be inclusive in a manner that I'm describing here. So this, like Marissa said, it's a no-brainer. It's something that we already do, but it's going to take us with having to have that vision, but also to help others to be able to change some of that perspective that we all have, so that we can accomplish them. And I think the idea of putting people in the right places for policies are things that most Indigenous people don't necessarily participate in, because we're too busy trying to take care of our places. But it is an important part. So we cannot assume that just by doing our work that there someone else is going to take care of the other parts. That we need to see ourselves as being dual tracked, in certain being indigenous to create your programs, to create co-management, and at the other side, be a participant in the policy part of this, so that we know that we're taking on responsibility for what we envision to be a better place. And so I hope that we could come to that kind of place in 2024. And yeah, so I hope that that's been helpful, so.
That's thank you, Uncle Saul, and really thank you to the whole panel, to Dr. Leonard and to Marissa. Just tremendous insights. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. And those are some beautiful goals to really work for, and by the end of the Biden administration. And I hope that the folks on the line, thank you for joining us. I hope you heard loud and clear from our wonderful panel, and took some of that knowledge, that perspective, the stories to heart, and hopefully you can continue this conversation. Hopefully it inspires you to look at ways you can help tribal nations and indigenous communities take back our stewardship leadership role for conservation work, to tackle these crises that are impacting the whole world. And I really thank you for joining us in this important discussion. And yeah, we could probably have way more than 45 minutes. Yeah, I wish we could keep talking, but thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of the CHOW week. And until we meet again. Yolk hello.
Aloha.